Welcome to the Afghanistan Project podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today we're doing something completely different from the standard episode. We're going to be talking about military transition, which obviously is not completely Afghanistan related, but in this circumstance, I have 3 veterans of the Afghan war here, and I think that military transition is just such an important topic these days as we see the suicide crisis continuing in the military and civilian communities. And I think it's an important time for anyone who is transitioning out of the service, anyone who has recently transitioned out of the service, or we were just talking before we started recording, for civilians who want to understand how to support the veterans and service members in their lives. So without further ado, my guests today are Jenn Noonkester, a retired Air Force senior NCO, Michael DeSerio, a 15-year Army senior NCO, and Rob Dufresne, a retired Army Special Forces senior NCO. I am beyond thrilled to have you guys here today, so thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks for having me.
That was awesome. It was like you guys planned that. Wow. I'm very impressed. Okay, so we talked before we got started. What I want to do now is have you guys each give your 5-minute or, longer or shorter, depending on how long you want to make it, a debrief of your military service, when you began the transition process, and kind of the highlights or maybe not so highlights of that experience for you. I'm going to do ladies first today. Jen, how about you tell us your story?
Awesome. Yeah. So 20 years and 3 days in the Air Force. Definitely hit that button to retire as soon as I could. There was some additional circumstances that happened in that area that really kind of sold that choice for me. But they say that when it's time, and that is 100% true in my case. I knew exactly when I was done. And it's not that you checked out, you just knew that your path was moving differently than what you were currently on. So my last couple years in, we had the pandemic. So I was working long shifts working that, and that helped me out when it came time to finally press the button to retire. Because of the job that we were doing, you couldn't take leave, you couldn't do anything. And so I was able to just bank all that leave. So by the time I was able or eligible to retire and start my terminal, I want to think probably my last 4 months in, I maybe worked a week total of the last 4 months of actual active duty because I had so much leave to use. And that's not to say that during your terminal leave or your last 6 months that I didn't have leave then too. But I got really lucky when it came to that. That helped me kind of get ready for that transition. I think for me, the easiest part of the transition was making sure that my identity wasn't tied to my uniform or my position. When I started to look at retirement, my plan was to come back to the unit that I was with and work with them as a contractor and do the same job that I had always done. But when the Afghanistan evacuation was in full swing and I had already gone through and did some personal things for it and made some personal sacrifices, I started to question whether or not that was the right call. We'll kind of leave it at that on that part of the discussion. But I got really lucky in the sense that I was Air Force, and Air Force is really good at pushing what's next. Education, Skillbridge, opportunities like that. And I know in my transition assistance program, I had some Navy guys that were with me that had no idea what Skillbridge was. For those that don't know what Skillbridge is, it's basically an opportunity, and every branch has a different title for it, but it's basically an opportunity for you to get experience outside of the military to, again, hopefully help with that transition and kind of help relieve some of that initial culture shock, which I'm not going to lie, it's still very much there. There are certain phrases that we in the military like to say that are not appropriate for the non-military folk. So that does still take some adjustment. But in the end, Skillbridge was huge for me, and it ultimately did let me know what my next path was. Without that, I probably would have gone back as a contractor, and I probably would have been fine, but I don't think I would have been as happy. So.
That's a very positive. That all sounds very positive, but I'm sure that there are some things to get into there that maybe we can get into some of the others pretty soon. Michael, I'm gonna tap you next.
Okay, so I'm Michael DeSerio. I did 15 years as an infantryman. Had every job that you could think of, from just a regular rifleman, deployed twice to Afghanistan. I was a drill sergeant. And then I finished up at West Point at the United States Military Academy. Um, I get asked all the time why I just didn't do the full 20. And just like Jen said, when you know it's time, like you know it's time. So I actually just got out 27 days ago. Um, so for me, it's real fresh. Um, and now um, I'll say the the transition process was real weird for me because I just kind of made the decision and like knew I was getting out. So like, what do? I go through the transition assistance program, and it for me, it was 100% just checking blocks. Um, Skillbridge wasn't really pushed. I wish it was. Um, but everybody at West Point is a sergeant first class or higher, so they kind of just expect you to know all this stuff without telling you. It's very assumed. Um, it was also very good being at West Point because everybody just left me alone. I probably only put my uniform on maybe 6 times the last year I was in, um, which was awesome. I kind of just flew under the radar for the last like year. And like Jen, I had a bunch of leave saved up, so I got out actually, I think it was July 5th, and was on leave till September. And I'll say the one thing that I started doing was applying. I was on USA Jobs like every day. I started applying early and often for jobs, um, and my spectrum was real broad. What I was honestly really willing to do in terms of job wise. To me, it's all just work in the end. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to do. Um, and I'm not super passionate about, they say if you enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life. Uh, I've never really enjoyed what I did, so I've worked every day in my life. So for me, it was kind of just like what could I do? What do I think I would be good at? Um, and then Jen hinted to this as well, as like my identity as who I am. I always tried to make sure that I stayed true to who I was. I joined the military at 23, so I had a little bit I'll say very little bit of like adult life experience before I joined the military, and I just tried to hold on to that and never let the military become my identity and who I was. Um, so my transition, granted, it's only been a month that I've been out, um, but I've been basically a civilian since July. And I think having that viewpoint during my career, I made it a decision once I became a senior NCO that I wasn't going to let the rank on my chest determine who I was and like how I was as an NCO, as a platoon sergeant, or first sergeant, whatever. Um, I didn't want there to be any difference between Michael at home and then Michael at work. I wanted to treat my soldiers fair and take care of them, and I wanted to treat my wife and my kids fair in the right way when I was home. So I think making that conscious decision helped me transition. Um, Also, like my vocabulary has had to change some. I would say that's the biggest thing. Trying to learn how to like chameleon as a civilian is really funny, really hard, especially because in the environment I work in, covered in tattoos, like like I should be where I work. So that's made it easy in the corrections world to do that. But um, I'll say my transition was very smooth, but I think that's because mentally I was prepared for it. I wasn't shocked by it. It wasn't unexpected. And I just kind of lined up my priorities of what I wanted to do, how much I wanted to make, and where I wanted to be. And I think that was like hugely part of what made it so easy for me was just establishing clear goals from the get go almost like an op order where like, this is what I want to happen and this is the intent, this is my end state. So what steps do I need to go through to reach my goal? And that's just what I did. And it made it pretty easy for me.
All right, Rob, that leaves you. And I want to say, before we start with you, Rob, actually, my good friend Will Selber was going to join us today. And I feel like it would have been really beautiful to have his story here. And I well may end up asking him these questions and pasting them in. But I can tell you right now, he, as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, he struggled mightily despite going through Skillbridge and all these things with his transition process. And a lot of that was Afghanistan related and the withdrawal and all the other things that he had going on simultaneously and the things that he had struggled with. And I wish he was here to talk with us, but he had a family emergency. And I'm wishing that that story were also presented now. And Rob, I want to hear. I've talked to you a bit about your story, and I never tire of hearing it. So I'm excited to have you tell it again to me and everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I wish Will was here as well. But yeah, I do hope that you get those answers or those questions answered, and so we can all see them when this comes out. But yeah, my experience in the Army, I joined in 1989 when I was 17, right out of high school, and I always wanted to be in the Army. I just, as long as I can remember having memories, that's what I wanted to do. And so I went and did that. I was infantry at first, and my first duty station was a 2nd Ranger Battalion, and that was great, but it was fairly short-lived. I left in 90 or 91, and I had a friend talk me into going to Special Forces assessment and selection. I didn't even know what that was, but I was always kind of, well, okay, sounds good. The biggest thing that kind of drew me to it is that he told me that no one could stop me from going if I wanted to volunteer to go. I thought that was pretty neat. So I went, and I made it. Luckily, I was very young. And then that's what I did for the rest of my career. I retired in 2015, and that was hard for me. It was also it was disappointing because I also never wanted my identity to be tied to or defined by my career in the military. I was pretty much the same person as far as my personality went, before I joined the Army. But yeah, it was very difficult for me. Part of that was, kind of how my career in Special Forces ended. Towards the end there, I was fighting a kind of a forced medical retirement and hiding from that. I had a battalion commander who was like, well, I can probably lose paperwork good enough to give you a couple more years. It was very kind of him, but yeah. So my last 2 deployments were completely, kind of staff centric, and I won't say I hated it, but I was not pleased. And I guess in the end it wasn't. It was just that I wasn't doing what I came into the Army to do. And that kind of hurt. It affected my transition in a couple different ways. First, I felt like I needed to continue doing work, probably a little bit too long. I think I did know when I should have gotten out, which was a few years before I actually retired. But I I ended up kind of helping to stand up a new unit for Special Forces, and it was very specialized. The job that I had, and you know, I felt kind of duty bound to help get that thing up and running, and I just worked too long. I stayed in the Army a little bit too long, longer than I needed to, and it kind of embittered me a little bit towards the end. Even though I wasn't conscious of that. That's something that I would find out or figure out later. Um, so that all that stuff kind of combined to make my transition pretty difficult. In fact, there were a lot of corners that I cut. I just kind of was a non-participant in the transition process at some point. Um, I was very angry during that entire time, and it wasn't just my transition. It was a bunch of other stuff that probably um, you know was not going great in my life, and that those things were probably, I think, um, a function of my service as well, and kind of some um, wrong-minded thought processes that I had at the time. Still struggling a little bit with that, but I am, light years ahead of where I was. And gosh, yeah, it wasn't great. I did not have the Skillbridge or the whatever the Army thing is. It may be called that. At least I wasn't aware of it. So yeah, I just retired. Um, I had a little bit of leave saved up. Um, I retired. I went back to music um, with a band that I had kind of joined before my retirement, and I did that for a little while. And somebody asked me if I wanted to get back into the biz and try contracting. I did that, and then transitioned to a GS civilian. I did that for, I guess, a total of about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, which put me at about 32 years of service. And boy, when I finally hung it up in 2021, I mean, I was very overdue from making the clean break transition. So I won't say that it was wasted time or anything. I really enjoyed working where I did, and um, my last job in the Army dovetailed well with my contracting role and my civilian job, and so that was fulfilling in a way. But I think I was just putting off what I really needed to do, and that was to make a clean break from the Department of Defense completely and pursue something else. So now all I do is I run a music studio here in North Carolina, and I'm performing with a lot of bands, and that keeps me busy, which is a good thing for me.
I can commiserate with the busyness and that being healthy. Um, So, as I was listening to all of you, I had a thought because, I wanted to just ask about Skillbridge, but I want to ask it in a different way. First, was Skillbridge offered to you before was that even a topic of conversation before you mentioned the intention that, you would transition or retire? And, or was it more of those things become available and known to you as that begins? And especially for you, Rob, I want to understand what would have happened. In fact, I'm going to go right back to you, Rob. I want to
Okay.
ask you first. Let's say that your commanding officers had said, no, it's time for you to get out. And here's, we need to train, you need to whatever. Would that have made it worse or better? And would it have been good if somebody would have sat you down and said, here are the programs and you're gonna go through them? Like, we're gonna, I don't know. I don't know that the answer to any of those is positive, because I think I know a little bit more than you've said here about the other things that underlay a lot of this. But I just want to know the answer to those for now.
Well, I think if someone had told me, that's it, this is the time, like, you're not thinking correctly about this, and just kind of help walk me through that process, I think it would have been a positive thing. But I think it was, the more senior you get, the more autonomy you have, and I just didn't have anybody, I guess, that wanted to have that conversation with me. Or maybe I was putting out a definitive, don't talk to me about this vibe. That's completely possible as well. Either way, I stayed a little bit too long for my own good. And yeah, that just kind of soured me a little bit. I think it would have been making that break a little bit earlier in my in my career would have been really good.
Absolutely. What about Jen and Michael? Did you get any advance notice of those things? I mean, and would it actually have been helpful, right? Do you want to engage those things before it becomes a possibility? Do we want to tell people every year, hey, if you're thinking about getting out, here are things to start looking at? What's that whole preparation part of the process like? And then, yeah, we'll start there. Jen, how about you go first?
Yeah, sure. So Skillbridge, I had done a lot of research once I made the call. So the transition assistance program was really good for some, but I found a lot of it because I was done. I was 100% done. So I had already started working on my budget. I started working on my resume, and it's a required course. So for those that haven't quite done those preparations, I think it's a phenomenal course, and it's a good way to find out that there's the opportunity for Skillbridge if you do it early enough to apply for Skillbridge. So there's certain criteria for the Skillbridge that you can go through. If you want to try to get a new company added, it's next to impossible right now. It is what it is. But if you go and there's a huge list of various things that you can do, they give you different time frames and such like that. So it is actually kind of a little bit of a long, like, you got to plan ahead. You got to look through it. You got to apply for it. And just because you really want to work at something doesn't mean they really want you. So that's the other thing, is like, you've got to make sure that it makes sense. And ultimately what the program's supposed to do is help you find a job. And that is the ultimate goal of it, is to make sure that when you transition, you've got something to go to, not just sitting at home wondering what you're supposed to do next. It's supposed to help you with that transition itself. So I was aware of it. I do know, like I said earlier, I do know of other people that had no idea it was even a thing. And I do know that they were actually, they were receiving a lot of pressure from some of their leadership to not do it because of Manning. And so that was one of those things that you sat there and you listened, and these people, regardless of how long they served, like, their entire career at this point has been in the military. and now you're telling them, hey, you only did 4 years, so sorry, no Skillbridge for you. It's kind of like a big disservice to people. And so, yeah, if you're a leader listening to this, help your people out. It's such a great opportunity, and the fact that you're bitter that they only did a couple years, or you don't think that they've earned the street cred to do it, that's a huge disservice to your people. Just you're gonna lose the manning anyway. Help them with the next step. And yeah, so yeah, I knew about it in advance, and again, you have to lean forward. You can't just wait for the information to happen, or else you're not gonna find it.
What was it like for you then?
For me,
Utilizing, yeah, using it and all of that.
so I really enjoyed my Skillbridge. I worked with the national park, so my entire career was inside, doing things that I'm not allowed. I can't tell my parents what I did. And so the idea that I could go and I could tell them cool stories about what I seen that day, the really cool bird I followed for a little while, the people I was talking to, it was kind of nice because now I can actually talk, and they feel kind of connected to, my family could finally feel connected to what I was doing. And so, yeah, and it gave me a chance to, again, like I was still very much active duty at any point in time when you're on Skillbridge. There's nothing saying that you're off limits. You're still very much their chicken. So while your company that you're working for considers you free chicken, meaning they don't have to pay for you, the military is very much aware that you're still their chicken, and they're definitely going to take it if they need it. So it does give you that opportunity to still have that uniform experience, but at the same time start to experience life outside of the military.
That sounds like such a huge difference, and I imagine that in and of itself helps you to remember, like, hey, not just, like you guys have all said, the person in this uniform, like my military identity, right? I can just picture the amazing difference between that, cubicle intelligence environment and being out in the national park. That's amazing. Michael, what about you? I don't think you said whether you actually did Skillbridge or not.
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay.
So I did my transition. It was a SFL TAP. I think that's what we Soldier for Life, TAP. I did mine like very close to my transition date. So I had already done. I forget what it was called before. I did it back in 2014. I think I was going to actually get out of the Army. No, it was 2016. I was going to get out of the Army then as a staff sergeant. But then my middle boy was conceived, and getting out of the military then did not sound like a good idea. So I ended up staying in. So I went through the program as a very bitter staff sergeant. And so I didn't pay attention to anything, nor did I really care. And I'm not going to say I had the same opinion as a senior NCO when I did it earlier this year, but it was pretty similar. I didn't really care. It was, like I said before we started recording, it was a very check the block thing for me. I was bitter towards the military, kind of like what Rob was saying towards the end of his career. I'm a career infantryman. When we're not doing the thing that we signed up to do, it's like we get very idle hands do the devil's work, and it's kind of where I was getting to, where not deploying or the ability to not deploy. Mentally, I was just kind of like, well, screw this. Like the Army, the way I'll just speak from my experience. The way the Army seems to be going is not the way I want to go with my viewpoints personally and stuff like that. So Skillbridge, I heard like in the ether about it, like it was this thing like that you could do, but I didn't know what it was. And I think for any NCOs or commanders that are listening to this, just to pound at home what Jen said, like afford your soldiers the opportunity. I learned that happy, comfortable, like soldiers, sailors, whatever, are going to work better when they're happy and comfortable. So like if you you're always going to be short on manning. Like that's inevitable. Like you're going to be short. When I was a platoon sergeant, I encouraged my soldiers to sign up for every SFL TAP program event there was. I don't want them at work all day, every day, doing nothing, training. I mean, we could just tell like it is. The soldiers sit around all day on their phones in the back. If we're not in a training cycle, they can only sweep and mop the floor so much. Let them go set themselves up. They signed their name on the dotted line just like we all did. Like they went through basic training, graduated, achieved their MOS, whatever it was, and now they're in the Army. Like they're afforded the same opportunities that senior NCOs and officers are afforded. Let's not gatekeep transition for them, because successful civilians that have been in the service are highly coveted in the civilian sector. Like, why not set them up for success? When it comes to Skillbridge, I wish I had somebody, a commander, a senior NCO that was a mentor to me, or a senior officer that would have sat me down and been like, Michael, look, like this is a program that's afforded to you, and I heard rumors about it. I did get a brief on it once at West Point, and like the superintendent would sign up for like this shows you how much I paid attention to it, because it was like the end of last year, beginning of this year, that he did this brief, and I don't remember anything about it. But I wish like I would have had somebody that sat me down and was like, this is what you need to do. There's this program, because when I'm sitting in the room with a Commandant Sergeant Major, like at my SFL TAP class, and I'm telling him all the things he needs to do with the VA and like the USA jobs and like all this, this is a Command Sergeant Major for the Commandant of the United States Military Academy, and me as a Sergeant First Class promotable. I'm like, hey, Sergeant Major, you should probably like, if it's that high up that we don't know about it, then it's a problem. So I feel like the military as a whole should do, it. I mean, I feel for Rob. Like this wasn't even a thing for him, and now it's a great opportunity. Like the job placement after that, I don't know what the percentage is, but I know it's really high. That you could either get hired by the company to do Skillbridge with, or it opens doors for you to network with different companies. Like, why don't we afford this? I know why we don't afford it, because you're still on the DoD's dime while you're doing it, and they're paying you while you're not there working for them. But wouldn't you rather set me up? And now I'm a recruiter for the organization, where I'm like, hey, I'm out in the civilian world, and now I'm telling people like, this is how the military took care of me. Yeah, great health care. They pay for my college. Everybody knows that. But hey, man, when I was getting out after 15 years, I did this program called Skillbridge, and like it set me up with this job. And now in my career field now, I just talked to some kid at the academy I was at to join in the military, because I have it took me a little bit of healing, we'll say, to have a good opinion of the military. But I got this kid, 19 years old, getting ready to join the Marine Corps, because I was a recruiter essentially for the DoD. But if you take that opportunity away, or you don't promote it, like nobody's ever going to find out about it. And now you're losing a very good population of people that you could go out and speak kindly of the organization with the DoD as a whole.
Yep.
Yeah, that's one thing that has always been so interesting to me, is that these senior military personnel who are who you're going to ask to do this, I want to transition, I want to retire, whatever, they've never done it. So how can they give you advice on how to do it? Because they've never done it. And it's kind of speaks to your point, Michael, of sitting there and having to give and being the expert when you're just learning the same things. And I feel like this recent cadre of people who've gone through and done Skillbridge and done TAP and been, able to do that should really be the ones giving that advice to the new folks who are trying to go through, just to ease that process, because you're coming up with an entirely new identity. And I was telling this to Rob a couple weeks ago when we were talking for an article. Like, I still remember, at least I think I said this, I don't know, I've said it, I've told this story too many times lately, but I remember leaving my intelligence job that I'd been in for 2.5 years, and I was angry as I was driving home from my last day of that job, because I realized Nobody's ever going to call me again from here. Nobody's ever going to need all the things that I devoted my life to for the last 2 years, 2.5 years. Nobody needs it anymore. Nobody's, I can't ever go sit in that skiff again and talk to somebody about the things that mattered to me. And I never realized how much that built up inside of me and how unhealthy it was. And, this can happen at any point, right? But for you guys, having put, my job, I didn't have to go deploy anywhere, right? I didn't have to go to unsafe places. I worked one of those compressed schedules where I got every other Friday off because I did 9-hour day, whatever. I had my cushy civilian life. Not so for what we ask of you guys. And so I feel like there really needs to be a lot more done here. It's great. These new things are great. We're adding them, but there's just a couple gaps that really need to be still addressed. The next question I had is this whole concept, and Rob, I know we've talked about this, you're part of this military structure. It's not about you, right? That's the other difference in the military. It's not about you, it's about the larger organization. And pulling yourself out of that without feeling like you don't matter. How do you do that? And what are the experiences? Did you guys have that feeling that, and not that it's your identity, but you're part of the Borg, for lack of a better, you've been assimilated by the Borg. You're a cog to someone many echelons up. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too harsh here, but tell me about that, being part of this structure and then leaving the structure, and how that kind of played into, or maybe it didn't play into your feelings. I said Rob, so I'll let Rob talk to that one first.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if I do think maybe that was, at least in my case, maybe that was a little bit too harsh a characterization, but it's not too far off. Um, you know, there really is a big difference between, yeah, being a part of something so big. I mean, not just organizationally with all the people, but you know, like the mission and that kind of stuff. The thing that actually, I don't know, I grew to embrace or was motivated by from the beginning. One of those two. Um, yeah, it was. Gosh, sorry, my thoughts are like all over the place right now. I yeah, that
I
was a
know one
part.
thing I'd
That
like
was a
to
big part of it.
say,
Yeah.
because the thing that I think of most, and it's not a direct, I didn't ask this properly to get this part out of you, but you had a lot of health issues, right? Body issues after 26 years of military
Mm-hmm.
service, but it happened before your 26 years were over. And
Mm-hmm.
when you would go and try to get help, and I was trying to tell Michael and Jen about this before we started recording, but you would go and you'd say, "Hey, this hurts, this hurts,
Yeah.
this hurts, this hurts," and what was the response? The response is like, and I want to, that's what I'd love for you to talk about, is kind of this compounded sense that like maybe the other troops need it more than me, and I have to stand back because I'm part of this great big organization and other people need help. That's kind of what I would love to hear from
Oh,
you.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't ask it well.
No, it's okay. Yeah, for sure. That was, you know, I. It's a crapshoot. I think. I don't think that everybody in the army has this experience, but it was certainly my experience, and it colored my attitude about the army towards the end. There were on more than one occasion. I went to get some physical injury looked at or something like that, and I got told one time, well, I have too many, I need like your chief complaint. Well, I'm like, okay, how do I do that? Like, I have no idea which one of these problems is most severe. You know, that's what you're here for. But I got told, well, this is too many complaints to cover in 15 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, I also didn't know this was a 15-minute thing. And like, we made zero progress after that for the rest of the 15 minutes. You know, I mean, he was dismissive of me, and so I was definitely the same towards him for the rest of the 15 minutes. I don't even think we went that far. And then, you know, that for some people, at least for me, that snowballs. So the next time I need to have something looked into, or I want to go reattack this, like all these different issues, I put it off because I don't want to have another one of those interactions. And at that point in my career, you know, like it could have gone very sideways. One of the reasons why I didn't even finish a lot of things during my transition. I remember leaving a finance thing because I like legitimately in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to go to jail today, so I'm going to leave. And I never went back. Like I never even finished it. It was, yeah, that's kind of what it was like for me towards the end. Now, in fairness, I may have been, you know, putting a very negative spin on things inside my own mind, where maybe it wasn't as negative as I was viewing it, but it is what it is. That's how it happened for me.
I feel like, yeah, I want to. Didn't either of you, Michael or Jen, have similar? Because I could see you guys were laughing at the, you know, chief complaint thing. So I feel like there's more to explore here, and I'd like to hear you guys' take on it. Michael, you go ahead.
Real quick, it's so funny what Rob just says, because when there was such a stigma with getting any sort of mental health care, physical. I mean, 15 years as an infantryman, we don't go to sick call. You go to sick call, you are just berated forever. Luckily, I never cared what anybody thought about me or said about me. So if I had an ouchie, I went to sick call. I was a brand new private stationed in Germany, and I had tendonitis so bad in my right Achilles, my tendon almost came off my heel. And all my NCOs were like, tough it out, tough it out. Next thing you know, I'm on a 1.5 month long profile, no run, no ruck, no. Guess what? I'm fine. And then when I came back from that, I ran 2 minutes faster on my 2 mile time. It was crazy. Like I actually healed. It was fine. But man, I'm so glad Rob said what he said, because the hard work and like the things that he had to go through cleared the way for me to feel comfortable going to go see behavioral health, to go to the PA and go get my back looked at after I herniated it. It took me a year and a half to get a PA to actually listen to me and go through any sort of pain management at all. But that transition, and you know, from 2015, I mean, I was a staff sergeant at that point. So those senior NCOs that were on their way out were bitter, and they're like, "Look, go to sick call. Like, you need to go see behavioral health. Go see them." Like that started to be a real big push. And when I became a platoon sergeant, every time when I was stationed out in Hawaii, the behavioral health clinic was literally right across the street from our COF. I would come out every day. I went once a week to go to behavioral health. I'd come downstairs where all my soldiers were at, and I'd be like, "Hey boys, I'm gonna go talk to the wizard man. If you guys need me, I'll be over there for the next hour." But I pushed it because it saved my life. I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't go to behavioral health. I guarantee it. But I would have never felt comfortable doing that if guys like Rob on their way out were like, "Don't do what I did. Don't listen to all the naysayers that say you go over there, they're gonna put their snake oil on you and all that." Like like they help. Like if we didn't have those people there in that profession, like there'd be the suicide rate on active duty would be just astronomical. But I've always like you health. It includes your mental health. Like that was on my way out, I stopped saying mental health. It's just health. It's not just, it's health, not mental, physical. There's no difference. It's health. And that was something that I learned young, that like, man, this hurts. Like you go to the doctor. That's how I was raised. You hurt something, you go to the doctor. But when you join the Army, they're like, something hurts, take a knee, drink water. Here's 800 milligrams of ibuprofen. drive on, like that's how it was back in the day. But I wasn't raised that way as a young man. Like, you break your arm, you go to the doctor and get a cast, not like, hey, let's wrap a splint around it and then like continue training. Um, so for me, on my transition out with my physical stuff, I had all the documentation that I needed because I went against the grain as a senior NCO, go as a platoon sergeant, being on a profile, um, and not a fake one. I went to behavioral health and went and talked to what I call the wizard. I had to I had to put it in a way so my soldiers, it wasn't it wasn't such a like bad thing. Like I had to make it to where like, I mean, and there were numerous times I've had soldiers come to be like, Sergeant D, I didn't know how to talk to any. You're the only person I could talk to because you're the only person that understands this. Like, I need to go talk to somebody. Boom, there I am, grabbing my section leader or one of my squad leaders, like, yo, sit with this dude. I'm gonna go do PT with the boys. But he just told me this at 7:30. Behavioral health opens. You're gonna take him over there and escort him. And if you can't do it, then I'm gonna do it. Like, somebody's gonna take that soldier there and take care of him. Like, I don't care about you're not a man. If you go talk to, like, everybody needs therapy. Therapy is amazing. And if this soldier feels like so compelled that he's got to bring it to me, like, that's a problem. As me, if I'm the only one in his life and in the military that he feels that he can go to and unload this on, like, that's a failure on multiple levels of leadership. But luckily, I try to do right by my soldiers and take care of them, as well as try to take care of myself the best way I knew how. And during that transition, I'm very fortunate that I did the legwork against the grain, because it is not a pop. I mean, Rob's talking about walking out of that finance brief because you get talked to like you're 12 years old, and you don't know anything. And I'm like, I'm a grown adult. I've been managing my own finances for the last 30 years. Like, I can do this. Like, you teaching me how to budget isn't like, I understand I potentially can make less money. I understand that, but like, I'm a responsible adult. I'm a senior NCO. So some of those classes that we end up going to are pretty ridiculous. And when you're a senior NCO, you don't have to take them seriously because you're like, I'm at the top. Like, I don't need, like, we and nobody questions it. That's how Rob was even able to walk out of that thing, because he's just, he's a senior NCO. Like, no, oh, that's Sergeant Major. He's just walking out. Like, well, guess what? He can, because he's Sergeant Major. And that's what everybody's gonna say. So like, it's funny because the experiences are very similar. I just wanted to point out for everybody that's listening or watching, like, make sure you pave the way for the next generation. Like, the work that Rob did, going through those frustrations, now he can be a voice to be like, yo, you don't have to listen to what those senior NCOs are saying to you. Like, go to sick call, go get your health taken care of. Like, do what's best for you, because if you're good, your family's going to be good. Your family's good. Work's going to be good. Work's good. Everything's good. And that first, it starts off with number one, taking care of yourself. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but Rob, like, that point about like he didn't go because it was, and I've dealt with that. Like, you go in there and they're not listening to what you're saying. Like, what hurts the worst? Well, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. Okay, well, you need to make another appointment for the other two. Why can't you just document it all right? I've just told you. Like, it's a very frustrating thing that I've personally dealt with as well.
I want to let Jen weigh in, but then I have a follow up for Rob that I know, because, it's not just like, I know that something helping you is people who have done this before you, who you consider icons too. And so I want to come back to kind of continue that thread. But Jen, I want you to be able to weigh in on, the what we were talking about with sick call and not prioritizing yourself in that culture that exists sometimes still.
Yeah, so I was laughing. I think Rob nailed it. I remember being young in the military and walking into a doctor's office, and they actually set an egg timer for 10 minutes. And I was like, oh, it's like that. Okay. So I can't lift my arm because I tore my tendon. You just gave me Motrin and an appointment to go to physical therapy for tendonitis. Well, it's not inflamed anymore because it's not attached. So it's just really, it's entertaining to hear that it's not just one service over another. I think collectively, like, yeah, we've seen the good, we've seen the bad, and we've definitely seen some ugly. As far as trying to navigate the way out, I will say towards the end of my career, I definitely felt like the other two. I saw, especially with the mental health side. I mean, we all served during, like, I'm gonna call it the GWA era, where you just didn't do that. If you had a problem with mental health, like, you're gonna be the person that makes it so that person B has to step up and cover your deployment. That is how it was communicated to us. Like, I don't really care what's going on with you, but you need to stay in. I think the math was like, you need to be 60% okay enough to deploy. Not healthy to deploy, but healthy enough to make it to the deployment. From there, that's kind of on you. And so towards the end of my career, I started to realize that that's not the right way to do things. And so while I personally didn't go into mental health until the very end, I would make sure that those underneath me, regardless of the service, would get taken care of, because I knew what was coming for them, and I knew I was towards the end of my career. And so hopefully by doing that and personally escorting them, if you lose a senior NCO from an office space that they were supposed to be there and you were expecting them to be there, and somebody has to tell them no, they took person B to the chaplain because they didn't feel comfortable to talk to your mental health technicians, to me that's a huge statement. Number one, it signals to the leadership, hey, you got a problem, your people are not feeling taken care of. And then it also lets them know, hey, like, your senior NCOs are holding you accountable whether you like it or not. And so I think towards the end of my career, that is really kind of what I was trying to hammer home to a couple of people, is just making sure that they didn't experience the same things that we experienced growing up in the ranks. And then ultimately, towards the end of my career, I did have a couple of them ask me, you know, hey, I'm looking at transitioning out too. What do I do? I saw everything that you did to try to get ready for it. What do I do as far as my medical records? Because like us, they would go in, they would get their 10-minute egg timer appointment, and then they'd have to pick their top 3 ailments, and then you could spend a minute talking about each, and then you were out the door. When in reality, you know, kind of like with my shoulder, I had tendonitis, I had a ruptured, like, my rotator cuff was torn, I had bone spurs, I had a whole bunch of mess of stuff in there, and they all showed differently. Like, one was pulling on my neck, one would give me migraines, one would give me numbness in my hand. And so to sit there and try to help triage that for a doctor, it kind of helped me let them know, hey, look, you know, don't get frustrated with the process, you gotta get it documented. And ultimately, when it comes time for your interview, for whoever's reviewing your case file, be honest, be upfront, and then exactly like Michael said, you have to have the documentation.
Correct.
Yeah. It's so frustrating to hear that, you know, because then all of this just makes me feel like, you know, the DoD is seeing you guys as, like I said before, cogs, right? We can give each cog 10 minutes. That's all we can, like, that's not going to make people want to join the military. And we're seeing this recruitment crisis now, right? You wonder why. It's because people feel disposable. They feel like, you know, they're watching the suicide rate inside, like you were talking about earlier, you know, the service member community. People are struggling. Yeah, I think, and I really wanted to have somebody on who was at HKIA and had a really intense experience, nearly committed suicide, actually, on the 1-year anniversary of the withdrawal. And, you know, there were so many mental health resources given or offered to people who were at HKIA, and it was not done in a way that was helpful to them, because it was right after the experience, right as they're just kind of like trying to come down from it, and they're still all kinds of trying to figure it out. And like, that's not, plus in a big group, that's not going to work. That's not going to work for people. And so you get these, I've heard horror stories of what has happened to HKIA veterans because they, you know, the unique set of things that they were put through. It's horrifying. So I love that you guys have worked to help the people under you, and that there is this great leading by example aspect, but I know that there are people who are getting missed still, and it's just so important. But I want to come back to what I was saying before. Rob, I know one part of your healing process has been listening to the people that you admired from your early days in the service. You were talking about with me the Battle of Mogadishu and some veterans of that who were talking on a podcast and how much that meant to you. And, were those people not talking about mental health before now, do you feel?
Gosh, I don't think they were talking about that. This is, it seems like a fairly new development, to me. Gosh, I guess early in the wars, fairly early in the wars still, we started hearing more and more about it. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the name of the program the Army had. Resilience?
MRT.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Master Resilience. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd like to think that there was a lot of good that came out of that, but I'm not sure, you know, uh, because that's kind of what the Army does sometimes. And, you know, kind of throw a little program together and, you know, trot that out, make it mandatory for everybody to get. And I think it should be mandatory, but I think there's a different way to go about things. You know, the Army just, maybe it's everywhere in the military, but if something's mandatory, um, like it stops being this, it almost ceases to be this useful thing that people are pushing for the reason it's actually uh, originally been thought up. Then it just becomes this mandatory, like, well, you're gonna go do it, and I don't care, you know, that kind of thing. Well, that drains all the, like, the goodness out of it in people's mind right from the get-go. Um, and that's so avoidable. Yet we continue to do that kind of thing. I'm not sure what the deal is with that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Have you sat through sharp training? My God. It's like, what in the world did you guys think you were doing here? Every single training I took when I was an Army employee was like, you just sat there and you're like, just get me a big coffee. It's going to be crappy, 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 crappy to fit
yeah.
what you have to do. And you come away from it not really having learned anything. And I'm sure, I just saw the office side of things, but like
I,
people
I-
need
I'd like
more
to
dynamic.
I'd like to piggyback. I won't say the word caveat because that's a total military term. What Rob was saying. So I was an MRT, so I was a master resiliency trainer. Um, and the when you see something that I'm sure everybody's done this, they see a program or they see um, a system and they hate it because they're like, man, this could be something great. Like if the person that was teaching it cared about it, if they were invested in it. So when I was a drill sergeant, I went through MRT, and I was lucky enough to have the instructor from the Sergeant Major's Academy actually as a drill sergeant at Fort Sill. So they brought her up from the Sergeant Major's Academy to teach it, and she's one of the originators that worked with Penn State to actually like create it. Um, and she told us all, because we're all drill sergeants, we're all tough and we're hard and you can't make us smile and all this stuff, right? We're just angry all the time. Um, and like the first few days, she was like, you guys have like your preconceived idea about what MRT is. She's like, and I'm hoping to change that by the end. And I like it. MRT is the whole reason that, because like my father had committed suicide right before I went to MRT, so I was going through a very tough transitional period in my life. And MRT literally saved my life because if I drank Kool-Aid ever in the military, it was for MRT. Because I saw like once I took it seriously and I didn't teach the be a ball, not an egg, bounce back, don't crack, which is like the hunt the good stuff, like all the stupid parts of MRT. Those are the classes you always get, right? We don't talk about problem solving or like what catastrophizing. Like I'm not trying to teach MRT right now, but like
Yeah.
those there's 12, 13, 14 different sections or different like programs within MRT of skills that you can go over, but everybody just teaches the easy stuff. They don't teach how to problem solve, dealing with adversity, which I think this newer generation has a really hard time with, dealing with conflicting ideas, opinions, personalities, right? So like when I was in MRT, and each one of those skills is supposed to be taught. If anybody's listening that's in the military, none of your battalions are doing what they're supposed to, because each one of those skills are supposed to be tracked monthly, and that you teach one, but nobody does it. So hopefully if you're a commander, you're listening to this and you start doing MRT because it works. But I would teach my whole battalion, and I have the slides up, but I would never look at them. I knew the content well enough that I could get through it. And if you have people that are passionate, and people that truly care about the health of their subordinates, those programs are incredible and they change people's lives. But if you just cookie cut and check the block on it, it will be crappy mandatory training. Just like everybody's saying, anything mandatory is never fun. Like when you hear the word mandatory fun, it's not going to be fun because it's mandatory. So if you have a person up there that's just doing this instruction because it's required, like nobody's going to take it seriously. Nobody's going to get anything out of it, and everybody's going to walk out of there dumber than when they came in. So I MRT, the skills that are taught in it I mean, and I've seen it change people's lives. But I think we kind of missed the mark on, like we do with a lot of things, where we're throwing a big net out, trying to umbrella a bunch of problems instead of like the individual leader at the fire team leader level, like the first line supervisor level. That's where we are really missing the mark, because all of our transitions were good because of what we did, not because what anybody else did for us. If we had people that, like we were talking about earlier, sat down with us and was like, hey, these are the things that you need to do, because they're informed on it. Like the first line supervisor is the most important person in any service member's life, aside from their family. Like that's their connection to everything. That's their information. That's where they get told what to do. That's where everything should be through that first line supervisor. And if we had more informed first line supervisors who truly cared, then I think not all the problems would go away, but I think transition, your time while you're still serving would be better. And then your daily life interactions while at work and then transitioning to your home life would be so much better if we just had a little bit more emphasis put on that first line supervisor with knowledge. Nobody wants to go to more classes or anything, but force people to do some stupid mandatory training on transition. And this is what you should do for your subordinate. These are the things that are required. These are the things that are not mandatory, but highly encouraged. Like even if they don't pay attention to it, they still heard it while they're in those classes, and they can regurgitate that. Some of the soldiers, at least help them out more than what we're doing right now.
That sounds like it actually could be a pretty useful program.
It could.
Am I wrong? I've been proven wrong about Army programs. What? Like I said though, my experience is purely on like the office side and those damn trainings that are just like, ugh. I want to hear
think all
from
that
you
stuff
guys.
is important.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
I think all those
I want to
things
hear
are
from you.
important.
Yeah.
They just, I feel like the Army has a really great way to just drain those things of their usefulness, their effectiveness. And I could be wrong. Maybe that was just me. Maybe I was draining it of its effectiveness. But gosh, I wish I had that your experience with MRT, Michael. I could definitely see when when I sat in my first briefing, I could see how that could be super effective, because it's an important thing. It just got, it got treated as
a check the block.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
And that's too bad. But yeah, I'm sure I think it's probably a two-way street, but there are definitely ways. Uh, if you're the person giving those briefings or providing that training and education, uh, to get people to actually buy in. But if your attitude's not 100% with it, like everybody's gonna sniff that out immediately
Hmm.
and just be like, okay, eye roll, right?
Yep.
Um, so that stuff is super important. I mean, I'm glad you guys both brought up the 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 fact that transition preparation, as well as the mental health piece, like that has got to be prioritized by leaders. The problem with transition stuff really is the fact that all the people who um, are on the approval line for that, like none of them have ever transitioned. So I feel like we almost come by it naturally that, transition is not emphasized. Preparation for doing the next chapter in your life is not emphasized because all the people who uh, are in some sort of decision making position to either approve people to go to it or decide how much emphasis gets put on it. None of them have transitioned because you only do it once, you know.
I
And
think
I don't know how to fix that problem, but it's a problem.
we had talked, Rob, you and I, a couple weeks ago about the culture, and since then I talked to one friend. We were discussing this thing we want to do together, and I mentioned a military leader who is very senior, and I know that if I said his name, all of you would know who he is. Former Marine Corps, very badass mofo, and I was just talking about how much I admire that person, and he said, yeah, but he has a really shitty perspective on PTSD. And I said, what? And he said, oh yeah, I was in a meeting with him, and he said basically that anybody who can't deal mentally is just a weak person. And this individual is very much older than everyone here, somebody old school, and that's part of what now, I mean, that would not be welcome in the military now. I think that perspective, right? But it's one that this is somebody that, we all, like I said, we all know who this person is. And so you have to kind of move that culture away, and it's through people like you, Michael. I mean, if you were teaching MRT to everybody, yeah, everybody would be on board, because it's like I can tell you're passionate about it and that you embrace those things. But who's giving that, right? Is it somebody like this dude, right? If he had to give it, it'd be like, here's a bunch of bullshit for you to be fed. Like, he wouldn't believe at all what he was saying. And so it's countering that culture. And I know that, Rob, you said that was a huge part, like in special forces. There was no mental health, no, that's weakness. Like you guys have all brought up before. It's weak to talk about mental health, and you just got to keep pushing and keep going. And I don't know if I have a question related to that, but I would love it if you guys want to talk about any. I think this whole thing has been about that changing of that culture, right? But what are ways that that it could be changed now even more, and from outside? You guys have left the military, but are there ways to keep changing it outside of the military?
I'll take first stab at this. So when I got back from my first deployment, I remember like we had just in processed. We went as individuals, so the four other people that had just rotated back with me had all been to other locations, and all of us had a little bit of a rough deployment. And we were all, we needed help, but the welcoming we got made it clear that that wasn't acceptable. So we, in process, we got the mandatory, hey, did you see anything? Did you experience anything? Yes, no, okay, great. Go ahead and finish your in processing, and then you can go on your recovery time. And they pretty much just kicked you out the door, regardless of what your answers were. You were literally just checking the box. And then that is when the Air Force stood up their resiliency program. And you had to come back, you had to attend the training. And so you had a room full of probably about 4 or 5 of us, and it was all your office mates. And all of us had just come back, and we're sitting here, and we had just met our brand new commander. And her spiel on it after my junior airman got up and gave this really great talk on mental health and ways to kind of combat some of this stuff. And he was getting ready for a deployment. It was a phenomenal topic. And her, as a senior officer, she defeated the entire thing. And we still talk about it today, and that was 14 years ago. Her response was, I don't really care what you do in your off time. I need you back here because I need you to deploy 4 numbers, and you're going to make me look bad, and I'm not going to get promoted. And that is all we took away from that entire spiel. And so when I sit there and I talk about transition, and I talk about the mental health stuff, and people ask me, why didn't you go earlier? You had all these signs, all these symptoms that something was wrong. Why didn't you go earlier? And I bring it back to that leader. None of us had gone through stuff like that before. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know why we were angry. We didn't know why we were hurt, why we were having nightmares. And, one of my friends couldn't go by himself anywhere. And so we didn't know. And so when I talk about that with people and they ask, why didn't you go? And we said, well, think about it from a culture aspect. If you had only been in the military for like 5 years and someone that was significantly higher ranked than you told you that it's a sign of weakness and you're being selfish and you're a terrible person if you try to go and get this help during a resiliency training course, that's what you're going to equate to it. And so when we try to sit there and we try to counter that culture, that is one of those big hurdles that you have to overcome. Is how do you bring that back? How do you make it okay so that you can go and try to do this? And so I've been trying. I tried a little bit while I was in the military, especially with the moral injury aspect of it. So I noticed a lot of my guys were really struggling with that through various deployments, various taskings, and various jobs. And none of us knew what it actually was. We just knew something wasn't right. Sorry, my cat's in the photo. And so we didn't understand, and nobody could explain to us what it was. They knew something wasn't right, and they knew that something was kind of off. But when you would go and you would talk to a therapist or a psychologist or a chaplain, for those of us that didn't want to go to get that stuff on the record, they didn't know what it was either. They were just like, oh, you're just struggling to adjust again. And so bringing that, I got really lucky and got on a deployment where they brought that up, and I was like, boom, there it is. That is what's wrong. That is, yeah, the other stuff's there too, but that explains everything else. So you're able to go through and you're able to show the other people that, hey, it's not just PTSD stuff anymore. There's so many other layers to it, that you got to stay committed. And if you want help, you've got to drive for it. You've got to want it. You've got to go for it, because especially in the military, they're not going to force you to go to these appointments. It's very much on the individual. And so one thing I've been trying to do since I got out and retired, is trying to continue to try to get that recognition for those things that nobody knows about, because it's a sign of weakness, it's unknown, it's not studied, it's not recognized, blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing, is just trying to educate people more and more about things like moral injury, and then trying to press that narrative, especially with Congress. Haven't really made any headway on that yet, but hopefully soon. So that's my spiel.
Dude, that is so freaking important. It's something that I wasn't introduced to that particular term until after the withdrawal, and listening to veterans talk about moral injury. And then even, I think it's something anyone can understand if they've been through a significant trauma in their life where they thought something was going to be a certain way. They're fed a line about what the expectation is, and then no, I mean, it's such an important topic. And I just respect the hell out of you for doing that, because we should all understand it, and we should
100%.
all, the better we can understand the elements of things that are impacting our service members and our veterans, the better we can help them going forward. So kudos to you, Jenn. Michael or Rob, do you want to respond to that?
I think she's spot on. I mean, like it really, at the end of the day, it's for the people that are still in the military, like, it is your responsibility at whatever level you are, whether you're an E1 or an E9, like it's your responsibility to help take care of others. And I think, when I was a drill sergeant, we teach Army values, and one of the biggest things that I would always talk about is like you need to care more for the people to your left and your right than you care about yourself, and like a true care, because you can tell people who are like legitimately like Rob was saying, you can tell if somebody go out there giving a class and you're sitting there and it's equal opportunity or sharp or MRT and you're just like, oh God, here we go. Like, and or you get somebody up there that's believes in the program, that's been helped by the program, and they get up there like, I'm gonna, even if I don't like what they're talking about, whatever I'm gonna give them a little bit more of my attention. I might be a subject matter expert in whatever they're talking about. I'm just there because I have to check the block, but no, maybe I'll put my phone down and I'll pay a little bit more attention. I think that is, if we could push like the bottom line up, I mean, this is the only thing I'm gonna say. If we push taking care of people more, like legitimately taking care of people, I think we would be a whole lot better off in the civilian world and in the military. Like if it was a legitimate care and it wasn't just, oh, I'm going to lose you off this deployment if you don't pass this behavioral health. I'm going to lose this if you don't do, like, that's at the end of the day. If I take you on this deployment and something happens to you because of your mental health, now I don't have you and your family doesn't have you. If I leave you off this deployment because you weren't mentally prepared for it, and at least now, like I don't have you on the deployment, but your family still has you. The soldiers or the sailors back there at your home station still have you. The people that care about you still have you. I think like if we could just push legitimate care and not just being a number for service members, I think that would help drastically.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's really at the heart of the issue for this transition discussion that we're having. If people actually cared. Now, if we took that approach to all the things that we find important, and all the things that you just ticked off are very important, right? They just, again, it's so easy for somebody who's not particularly invested in that or believes it, if they happen to be the person that got tapped to give that briefing or to provide that training to other people, you just ruined it. And like the story Jenn mentioned about that senior officer, just, I mean, that's criminal to me. And because I mean, just can't imagine, all the different potential consequences of that. There may be people who are not with us anymore because of that. And, I mean, we do need people that genuinely care about the things that they're talking about. It's going to improve recruiting. It's going to improve retention. It's going to, I mean, Michael, you brought this up. I mean, people's families are going to look more positively upon, service to the nation. Certainly, there are different ways, all sorts of ways you can serve the nation that have nothing to do with the military. But, this is something that we need, that not a lot of people qualify for in the first place. And then, to take that population and chop it up into smaller and smaller parts just because of this kind of thing, where people who don't particularly care about it are undermining the entire mission when it comes to these things like that. That's only hurting us even worse. And while I had a very bitter, at least at some point towards the end of my career, view of a lot of things military related, I mean, it still remains the great honor of my life. I mean, I have still, to this point, I've done that far longer than I did not do that. 32 years, and I mean, it'll be many more years before I go 32 years not having been a part of the Department of Defense. But that's super important. I don't know how to fix that, but us talking about this and just throwing out ideas, actually giving a shit about it, hopefully that promulgates like more like attitudes out there, and just spread the goodness.
Yeah, I'm super amazed to see, people who are still in, who are pushing and leading by example, like Michael, like you were when you were in, I'm going to go see the wizard. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
Like, I see that now in the community of people who are well respected, and I love that. I think that's a really positive step that, and the people like, the young man I mentioned who I really wanted to have here today, the HKIA veteran, after he tried to kill himself, he started working with a group of HKIA veterans and telling his story so that other people wouldn't feel the need to, wouldn't get to that point that he got to. And he's so happy to tell that story, and if it helps anybody else. And so I think, talking about these things is really important. There's one thing I wanted to ask you guys, because now we've talked about, inside the military, right? But I want to talk about the civilian world, because that's what transition is, right? You're like joining the civilian world as a veteran, but now you're like, you've been programmed to become a member of the military. They don't deprogram you, for lack of a better term. I did not come up with a better term, but like they don't get you ready for that. And now you are with the rest of the civilians. And like, what was that like for you guys? Was that hard? Were there and I want to know what the civilians around you, were they helpful or not? You don't have to name names. You can come up with code names or whatever if there was a particularly, bad or good interaction. I don't know. But how was that aspect of transition? I didn't ask that well at all, but I'm going to say, Jen, you go first.
I think I get where you're going. So I think for me, at first it was kind of nice. So in the military, I used to coach swimming for kids. So I was used to dealing with civilians kind of on a more professional level. So it made it a little bit easier to sit there and talk to some of them and kind of just interact with them. And most of them were really respectful and knew that there's certain questions that you don't ask a veteran. But some of them, maybe they're a little ill-informed, but the first time I meet you should not be, the first question you ask me should not be how many people you've killed. That's between me, my God, and my therapist. And so it usually, like, it takes you a second to be like, what did you just ask me? But what was really cool about the people that I had surrounded myself with at that time was that they were real quick to shut it down. So they understood it was inappropriate, like, I get it, you're just trying to figure out how to break the ice, but ask me about my hobbies, not about that. And so it was really kind of entertaining to see that side of it. And then I think the other hard part is the language. So for me, saying, it's going to be a hot minute or press or something like that, that's normal talk. But when you say it to somebody that doesn't know what that means, they're like, press what? Like, we're not drinking coffee. So it takes a minute to try to get everybody on the same page. And my cat really wants to be in your podcast today.
I love it. Your cat is adorable.
She's like, hi. And so I think for me, one of the hardest things was, and this is super trivial, but there were two things. We had a weather emergency, and it was really weird because I had just retired, and even on Skillbridge, if there was an emergency, you still had to check in. You had to have accountability for your people. You had to say where you were, and all of that stuff. And so we're sitting here, and like my phone, the weather alerts are going off on my phone. I'm like, oh no, who am I supposed to tell? I was really stressed about this. Who am I supposed to tell that I'm okay where I am? And I think that was the moment when it dawned on me, no one really cares. Like, you're good. Go do you. And so for me, that was a really big struggle. And then the other thing is when I went to one of my trips on DC, I'm used to the military. It takes forever to get your leave approved. And then you've got to pre-buy your tickets, but you can't buy your tickets until your leave's approved. and all this stuff and all these hoops you have to run through. And so I was getting ready to do that, and they were like, why are you telling me all this stuff? I don't care about your flight itinerary. I just need to know you're not here. But you need to know. Like, you're supposed to know that I have a plan to come back, but you're not letting me tell you my plan. And I know who's going to cover my job. And they're like, I don't care. Like, you're not going to be at work. It's fine. Don't be at work. Go do you. And so I think for me, those were probably the biggest things that made it kind of difficult to transition, to just remind yourself that all the big things that you thought about in the military that were super huge, in the real world, it's not that they don't care, it's just they don't need to know that. So they don't really care that, you have X number of funds to fly back in case they absolutely need you for, I think at the time I was working at a coffee roastery. So like, if I need to come back for a coffee roaster emergency, like, I can do this. I've got it. And they're like, I don't care. Like, okay, great. Go do you, friend. So I think, yeah, those were probably the big things for me, is just trying to make that transition, and then understanding, there's certain phrases that you can say and certain phrases you can't say. And I think the one that I miss the most is the F-face one. It is really hard not to say it. So it was a term of endearment with some of my friends and I. And so not being able to say it now in a professional environment is really kind of difficult, because it's almost come out a couple of times. So I think those were probably the biggest transitions for me.
Oh, that's fun. Do you miss DTS though? Like,
not even a little. Not even a little. The current job I have is getting ready to go through like a GSA portion for vehicles and such. And I almost threw up. I was like, no. I know what's coming next. We're not doing DTS. Absolutely not. No. That can go to hell where it's supposed to stay.
Agreed. Michael, how about you?
So for me, it's like working at West Point. I got, and like the lack of anybody caring it about me up there, which was very beneficial for me. So I kind of like started my civilian-esque life as soon as I got there, in 21, because I was wearing like Class Bs every day. So like I was wearing a dress shirt and a tie and dress pants and dress shoes. So like, yeah, it was a military uniform, but it was more of a professional look. In my role there, I was a cadet company first sergeant. Really, I was more of a counselor, honestly. I mean, I was in charge of their military development grade. And it basically, like, West Point has their own cadet chain of command and everything. So me and my major, we were just kind of like their OCs for being commanders and first sergeants and platoon sergeants and stuff. So it was very, very hands off. So I really just sat in my office. Well, now that I'm out, I can tell all my secrets. I literally just sat in my office watching YouTube all day long. Like, I didn't do anything else. I mean, like, literally, I didn't do anything. I just sat there watching YouTube, and like a cadet would come in, and not to get back on what everything else we're talking about, but like telling them to go to behavioral health or telling them to go to this, or, like, really I was kind of just like a traffic controller, like telling, like, just ping pong ball dudes and gals where they needed to go. So for me, kind of like my transition started there. Luckily, I know if I would have been with the boys, as an infantry company first sergeant, my transition would not have been the way it has been, because I mean, like, my leadership philosophy was the mission, the men, and me, and I would have delayed everything. And then, like, if I went through transition, I'd have just checked the block even worse than I already did, because I would have been more worried about the boys and the girls that were, in that company. So my transition out, it's been, we talked about this earlier. Like, none of us tried to like identify as what the uniform we were wearing or anything. It's like, and brought up, how many people did you kill? That's like a age old question for anybody in the military. But has anybody ever asked the doctor how many open heart surgeries they performed? You know what I mean? Like, that's, so like, I think like we're like this weird mysterious entity out there. Like, oh my God, you were in the military. Like we're not in the Secret Service. We're not out doing espionage missions, Um, well, Rob might have, right? But that's a little different, But for us regular like infantry dudes, like I just a grunt. So I think like I think for the civilians listening out there, and we're humans too. You know what I mean? We're not like we still eat. We still like to drink water and maybe a couple beers. Like it's like we have feelings too. Like we're normal people. So for me, that with that transition getting out, like it was a very fluid, easy thing for me, just because West Point kind of gave me uh, working at a college, it was a very smooth, very normal environment for me to be dealing with civilians, parents, I'd meet parents all the time. Um, so then transitioning out, I've always had more friends that were civilians than I ever did in the military. I made it a point to that. I like to separate my work and my play. Um, Not saying I didn't have my soldiers at the house for Thanksgiving and stuff like that, but like I didn't typically hang out with other platoon sergeants or first sergeants. Like I hung out with civilians. So I wanted people. I didn't want to talk about work when I was off work, and everybody here knows if you're in the military and you hang out with people that you work with, you're going to end up talking about work. And I had enough work, so when I was off work, I wanted to be a normal human. So for me, it was easy. Um, like Jen said, the language, uh, it is not as explicit as I uh, thought it could be. I mean, the line of work that I do now, it's honestly the language is worse than it was in the military. But I work at a prison, so it's much, it's expected. But just I got lucky because where I'm employed at, it's a paramilitary organization in the corrections world. Most of the guys that work there are prior military. They're all gun bunnies, so like I make fun of them all the time. That's field artillery, um, so I make fun of them all. But like it's still that brotherhood there. Um, I think that is extremely helpful. I get a level of respect that most civilians coming off the street going into that environment don't get. I'm good with everybody there. So it's my work environment has helped with my transition. And there's still some similarities. I wear a uniform every day. I get up super early to go to work. Um, but I think the group of people that I like kind of took my transition journey with, have helped. Like my girlfriend being there with me for the last almost 2 years now of me getting out and now being out. It's really helped to have some normalcy, and and not there wasn't anything really unexpected. I think that for a lot of veterans when they go to get out and they hit that civilian world, I think the initial thought is you're like breaking through a wall that you've never been to before, and it's really not that bad. Like you go to Walmart every day, or you go get McDonald's. Like it's nothing different. It's just your job's different. Um, and I think just like getting used to like not being babysat, just like what Jim was talking about. I mean, like you're an adult. Like people really don't care that you have a safe route to like where you're going for vacation. They don't care. They're like, are you going to be here back on Monday? Like it's kind of cool to get treated like an adult again, I guess. So
That's funny. So before I ask you and let you go, Rob, I want to say like I'm amazed that civilians are actually asking that question, how many people did you kill? And I grew up with that whole idea of you just don't ask veterans about their service, right? You just don't ask them. And this is what I would pose. Find out. Ask veterans about their service. Like, okay. I don't want to, Rob, I want you to talk, and then I'm going to ask another question.
Okay. I mean, so first, I'll just say I agree with you. Just maybe steer clear of you know, how many people did you kill?
Right. Not that question.
Steer clear of that. I think I mean, it's just such a function of, Hollywood and drama television. Because people who just never had that in their lives, military people in their families, I think where do you get your information? They just get it from stuff they see on TV or movies, or the internet, maybe, I don't know. But certainly a skewed perspective on how the military is. If they only knew, right? And it goes both ways, I would say. Like, um, I just remember hearing some people say, I thought about going in the military, but at the end of the day, I don't think I would have done very well with people yelling at me every day. It's like, you know, okay, well, I hear you. It's not like that, but all right, whatever. You don't like people yelling at you. I mean, neither do I. There's that, and then there's, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum where it's, like, I don't know, everything is just all about, uh, you know, honor and duty and all that kind of stuff. It is about that, but my gosh, I always felt like if the enemies of our nation just had like a hidden camera, at so many points of every day in the military, including deployments, they would attack immediately, just with the extreme jackassery and just the immature, like all the stuff that I love, right? Like that's my sense of humor. I feel like, man, I feel like that's a part of military culture. But it's just so dumb sometimes. Like even just the smartest people I've ever worked with, it's just you embrace that kind of stupid, like stupid humor sort of thing, keeps you sane. Um, anyway, so yeah, it runs the gamut, but definitely talk to people. And I would say, it's a two-way street for service members or for veterans. Um, when you're talking to them, you don't have to be all dramatic like they're already getting from the movies. Like, well, yeah, you may not be able to talk about what you're doing, like what the main thing of your job is, but there are things you can talk about. So why even say, well, I can't really talk about it? If you're saying that in just a regular conversation, I mean, you're trying to convey something, very mystique, centric. But I mean, I don't really see that many people talk about that. I think I witnessed that kind of thing more when I was younger in the Army. And, my peers were younger in the Army. We were all immature when it came to that kind of stuff. But, yeah, have a good conversation. Try and give them a good view of what the military's like.
Yeah, I think, listening to you say that makes me think of a couple other things. Just, if you're a civilian trying to go into that and you've never talked to a veteran before, just kind of educate yourself a little bit beforehand so you don't fall into questions that can be tricky. I mean, I know a lot of veterans who never got to deploy to a combat zone, right? And that is a tough thing for them. So if you're just like, hey, where'd you deploy and when? I want to, like, that can be a bit of a tough one. Like, there are questions that can bring up, rough things, but just get to know the people you care about and listen, man. Nobody tells a story like a veteran. I grew up listening to my dad's stories about being an F-14 Rio, and that's the reason I am here today listening, because I love it. It's the coolest thing. I'll never have been in the military. The closest I get is these stories of service, and I love hearing them. You are privileged if you get to listen to someone tell you their stories about the things, and some of them are just ridiculous. Dead baby jokes, not really a big fan of those are a big thing in the military. Some branches, and they're like, I don't like the dead baby jokes, but like, there's lots of good stories about lean-tos and magazines and whatever. Like, just freaking listen and don't judge if you weren't there. It's pretty easy. Guys, I've watched your faces, Jen and Michael. You've been laughing hysterically, and so I feel like you have things you want to say, and I would like to listen to them.
Well, I'm just thinking what Rob was saying, like the stupid things that like, and like you're hitting it. Like we 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 didn't join the military for, well, everybody joins for their own reasons, whether they may be a patriot or whatever. But the reason we stayed is because of the people that we were surrounded by, and that's the reason anybody re-ups on their contract, is because the people, they don't do it for the job. I promise you that, because nobody likes it. I mean, there's times of it. I mean, like I was an infantryman. We're shooting guns. We're blowing stuff up. Like it's all the cool, sexy movie stuff, right? But like we we re-up because we're sitting on a mountaintop in Hawaii, like telling stupid jokes, or we're tying the LT to a tree, or we're making the new guys qualify, like that. And if you don't know what qualifying is, it's hanging upside down on a tree, arms and legs, and you gotta last as long as you can. And like every new guy has to do it, like including the lieutenant, like they got to qualify. That's the reason we do what we do. Um, so I think to your point of like talking to veterans and stuff, like, I mean, I've been on your podcast. I've been on other ones where like I go into grave detail about my deployments. And everybody's different. I'm not saying everybody should be like me. I have zero issue talking about anything I ever did. Um, because I've just come to terms with the things that I did. Like every round I fired, I can't take it back. It's as soon as I shoot it, it's gone. So um, as long as I felt justified in those actions, like I'm good with it. And even if I didn't feel justified with it, then well, what, I can't do anything about it now. Um, but I think like in the conversation of talking to veterans and stuff, it's just talk to them like they're normal. Like the easiest question is be like, hey, so you were in the service? Yeah. Oh, so how did you like it? That right there, like, ask me that, I'm going to talk for the next 30 minutes because I like to talk. But like, and if they don't want to talk about it, they won't. But we have, I mean, all of us here could tell some hilarious stories of things that happened, and like that's the reason we stayed in as long as we did. It was for the good times. Nobody stays in the military for the bad times, and then everything that I'm going to remember going forward as a civilian is just going to be the good times and the bad times that are now funny, like getting rained on the top of a mountain somewhere, like that shared suffering that became hilarious. I think that's like the big topic now of things like, man, this one time I was deployed here and we had to do this, and man, it was so funny. Like not then though, it's hilarious now because like that sucked. But like I think that's the thing that kind of at least like Jen and Rob and myself, like no matter what, like he's talking about the jackassery, like that's that's what keeps you coming back right there. That's what I loved about being in the military, was all that stuff.
Same.
Yeah, 100%. As soon as he said that, I definitely had a tear because I was laughing. Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. One of my favorite things when I'm having a conversation with somebody after they ask, hey, what did you do? Where they run through the standard number of questions, and then they ask you, hey, what's the craziest thing you've experienced in your military career? And you got to sit there and you got to think, and you start laughing before you even tell the story. They know it's going to be good, and they're going to sit there and they're going to listen, and it gives you an opportunity to tell them things outside of that random guy that had a really misinformed question that was completely inappropriate, and now they're laughing because you're telling them about how you got stuck in an exercise and you guys had all these MREs that nobody wanted to eat, so you build a giant MRE fort and a giant chair for the leader to sit in, and there was no leader, so we made a leader. And you're just telling these stories like this, and they're like, you did what? And yeah, and so you get to tell stories like that, and they all laugh, and that's what they tell their buddies, and they tell them about, hey, these guys they went to this location, they went to eat with some of the locals, they all got food poisoning from it because they didn't understand this, and this, and everybody's laughing, having a great time, and you get an opportunity to kind of explain the other side, that the non-resiliency stuff that people are like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's important too because it bridges that divide between civilians and the military. Like the better we understand each other, the better we can support each other and be there through the tough times and then help people coming out of the military, right? And say, "Hey, yeah, I have a friend who, just the connection, right?" And Rob, I want you to talk about healing loudly because that phrase hasn't come out yet, and I
Yeah.
really want to hear you talk about it a little bit before we close today.
Okay. Thank you. So I think it ties in very, very well with a lot of the discussions we've been having. Um, and I'll just, so to be clear, I'll just say this about my experience in the Army Special Forces. It is that we did have, um, we had a lot of support for, um, you resiliency and mental health and physical health and all those things. And we did have a very strong environment, at least for like the second half of my career, uh, for people and really encouraging that, like genuinely encouraging it. Um, it was, but you don't seek all these things within special forces. The help that you need to get often comes from all different sorts of places in the army, and that's oftentimes where things kind of fell apart for me. This is just my experience, so I did want to just kind of clarify that one thing that I don't want people that I know to see this and be like, man, you really put a negative spin on that for the regiment. I'm like, no, that's not it. Uh, but we're not seeking mental health uh, services through the regiment. We're getting that from somebody else, and that's it's very different sometimes. Anyway, I did have a lot of problems with, sort of my perspective on some things. It's one of the reasons why, I also, gosh, I struggled with, uh, suicidal thoughts for a long time. And finally, one of my friends um, was talking about, you know, the stark contrast between suffering in silence for so long and um, like if you did that, like we did, then it's you've got to heal loudly when you start to heal, because that gives everybody else that hears you and sees you going through that process and pursuing, you know, health, gives them the opportunity or the license to do that for themselves, and for people to talk more positively about that. And it just never used to happen. And then at some point, I think that changed, but still it was a mixed bag of people just providing lip service to a certain topic, and the on the rare occasion where you get somebody who's just completely genuinely into this and passionate about it, and is really trying to push that in their own unit, their own friend circle, and then beyond, throughout the military. My gosh, going to Congress and trying to get some things changed, like that's huge. I think that's really important. Um, as we were talking here, I really feel like this also is tied in with healing loudly, but if the military um, would figure out a way to uh, recognize and award people um, for supporting those kinds of things, like Michael, what you're talking about, like you normalize this with your guys, and you're not only giving them permission, you're telling them, like, you need to go get checked out. Like, these kinds of things should be recognized. It shouldn't all just be merit, valor, you know, or that kind of stuff. Maybe merit is part of this, but it's just something that does not get recognized. One of my last squadron commanders, who's a good friend of mine now, he talked about it all the time, and he was very open about his own struggles, like being addicted to painkillers at one point in his career. And, you know, I mean, I know a lot of people were taken aback by that, but he talked about it just incessantly. He says, hey, I talk to my therapist like every day for at least a little. This therapist actually was, in the unit, and then she left, but she would still carve out 10 minutes or so with, just to talk to him. And that kind of thing, being that open about, sort of dark subjects with your people, when you're the leader in that organization, or at least at that echelon, that should be recognized. It should also be recognized when, you have young E2s or E3s talking to one another about that, and hearing one of their buddies saying, I don't believe in that shit, and correcting that person, saying, well, you need to believe in that shit, because I am here right now because of, help that I got. That's right. That should be, it's just not recognized in the way that it should be, because that is also saving lives. That is also helping out with future recruitment, present day retention, all that kind of stuff. And just like Michael was talking about, your everything in your life is going to improve if you have that kind of genuine interest in health, family time, your time. You're going to work better, all that kind of stuff.
Rob, I'm so freaking happy to know you, and Michael and Jen, you guys, dude, I'm floored by everything that has been said today. I thought that this would be really great, and you guys blew my expectations out of the water, and I just want to give you guys all a last chance to say anything that I didn't ask about, or just final words, whatever you have to say. It's we'll go from the order that we started in. So Jen, first.
First off, this is the first time I'm meeting Rob and Michael, and guys, amazing stories. Rob, I don't know what type of office you're in, but it looks absolutely amazing. So have fun with all those instruments. That's pretty sick. I think at the end of the day, you asked about transition and how to set yourself up for it, what makes it easier, what makes it harder. I think at the end of the day, you're going to want to make sure that, number one, you do your homework. Your opportunity to get help shouldn't be your last 3 weeks in. Exactly like Rob and Michael said, it's something that should be encouraged throughout your career. So exactly like Michael said earlier in the podcast, you go in for a broken leg. If you've got some issues going on and you need something that's not visible, then you should also be able to go and do that too. And I think getting that on your record, not just for the sake of getting it on your record and to get that disability rating, that's going to be a huge help, because at the end of the day, when you separate or you retire, if it's something service connected, they're 9 times out of 10 they're going to find a way to try to help you. And so getting the help you need before you realize it's too late to get the help is not really the right answer. And so I would encourage people to do their homework, get their stuff on the record, and then also start getting those experiences outside of the military. Go out, be a member of the community. Don't do it just because you get those brownie points for your performance report for the year, but do it to start networking and starting to see what else is out there. And then ultimately make friends with with somebody that's gone through the process. The hardest thing to do is to learn a lesson that's already been learned, and then people wonder why you're learning it now. So take that time, take that opportunity. I understand not everybody's going to have that opportunity, but it just kind of breathes life back into networking. Everybody's pretty much got a LinkedIn at this point. Everybody's got social media. You've got really big presence that all just retired from the Army all over Facebook and TikTok and stuff. And these guys really do care about their people, regardless of the service. Reach out, get that help so that your transition goes easy, because I think all three of us have seen where it's gone really right or it's gone really wrong. And sometimes those really wrongs really aren't really the best at the end of the day. And there's ways that that person could still be with us if they would have had that structure and that support to get ahead. So again, just prepare, reach out, ask for that help.
Michael, how about you?
Well, I'll just say, like, I know this was supposed to be on, like, transition, and we've kind of like ebbed and flowed, like, through service and everything. Sorry if I sound different now. I had to take my AirPods out because they died. But I'll say this: if you're going to transition out of the military, do whatever the earliest it is. If it's 18, 24 months, start that, for the Army SFL TAP, start it early, and you are afforded the opportunity to take it more than once. So if you do it at the 18, the max timeout, go back in at 6 months or 12 months out, engage where you are. Read up on the regulations when it comes to transition, the things that you are afforded and authorized to do that the commander cannot say yes or no to. The last I checked, the commander can't say no to any of the programs, even the volunteer ones. So, like, just look up the regs on it and be informed. When it comes to your transition, be informed. Knowledge is power. And it's a whole lot easier for you to pull out a regulation that says you're authorized to do X, Y, and Z, like Skillbridge or one of these other programs, and where you can wave it in front of your commander's face for once and be like, "Nah, sir, right here it says that you have to let me do this." So, like, oh well. And the other thing I'll say on transition is make sure you have support. Whether it's the people that your friend group outside the military, your friend group inside the military, your family, whatever, have some support. And like Jen's talking about with veterans that went through it, find you some transition mentors that can help you. Because when it came to my VA disability claim, I got a lot of mentorship on what to do, how to do it, get a VSO, like all these things that made my transition and my disability claim very easy, to where literally I'm getting paid the first month after I'm out of the military, which that is not typical for a lot of veterans that have to go fighting with the VA. So early and often is all I can say when it comes to transition. And anybody that's still listening that's staying in the military, take care of number one. Nobody else is going to take care of number one better than you. Nobody can really tell you what's best for you when it comes to your physical, mental, spiritual health. So do what's best for you. Listen to that voice deep in your gut, that intuition that you have, and always do right by the people around you. Take care of those that are beneath you and support the people that are above you. And I've had a pleasure meeting Rob and Jenn today. It was awesome to talk to you guys and hear your stories. Super cool. And it's so cool to see like all the parallels, even though like we come from different backgrounds like this. It's so crazy that it's still also similar. But thanks for having me on here. I appreciate it. It's been awesome. Thank you.
I was glad to have you. Rob, you get the last word. Well, kind of last.
I just, I will echo everything Jenn and Michael said as well. Bringing it back to the transition, since I did not do mine very well, I would say listen to what Jenn and Michael are saying. If you listen to what I'm saying, it's more of a, hey, don't do that. Don't do it that way, because you don't have to do it that way. There are better ways to do it. But I'm so glad that you were interested in talking about this, because it's crucial that this information gets out there and spread throughout the community, because you only get one shot at it. So it's not like people get good at it because they've done it multiple times. One time, that's it.
Yep. And you're doing it with help from people who've never done it, right? With, the support of people who've never gone through it. Yeah, you guys are so spot on here. And I know, Michael, we really did ebb and flow, but I think all the things we touched on are things that become so impactful as you're going through this. So I appreciate that you guys had those parallels, and that I think it really does for somebody who's going through this, or for somebody who needs support, who's gone through it and didn't, have maybe tried to get all the checks in the box and is kind of struggling now. I think that this will really be validating and helpful. And I just appreciate, it's hard to be open with people you've never met before. So you guys were just, I'm so impressed with your vulnerability and honesty with these really tough topics. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone else for sharing their time and their support. This is really important, and I think we can all learn something that can help us help each other. Tasha Kaur, and I hope to see you all again soon.